Located on the outskirts of downtown Houston, sits the largest church in the entire U.S., although that wasn't always the case. And actually, the Compaq Center was home to 4 championship teams before it ever held a sermon. When the Houston Rockets announced they would be building a new arena downtown, the city of Houston dreaded having to deal with a structure that no one wanted. But then, out of the blue, came a surprise that no one expected. A surprise that changed Houston and changed how the world viewed going to church. Join me today as we tell the complete story of a modern ruin with an unbelievable ending. My name is Lee Brees, and this is Modern Ruins, Episode 9. At this point, fans of the channel may know that just because the venue in question is located in a specific city, doesn't mean the story starts there, and the Compaq Center is no exception. In the late 1960s, the city of San Diego had become a booming media market. It showed so much promise that Barron Hilton, owner of the Chargers of the American Football League, decided to move his team there from Los Angeles and build one of the time's most momentous sports venues. It wouldn't be long after that J. Walter Kennedy, the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, would visit and admire both the San Diego Stadium development and the San Diego International Sports Center, home of the San Diego Gulls of the Western Hockey League. At the time, the Los Angeles Lakers and San Francisco Warriors were the only NBA teams in the Western United States. And after hitting it off with Gulls owner Robert Breitbard, Kennedy invited him to the next NBA owners meeting, where Breitbard was well received. So well received, in fact, that the owners voted to award him and the city of San Diego with an NBA expansion team. Breitbard paid a $1.75 million fee to make his new enterprise official. A naming contest for the franchise then took place among San Diego residents, with the name Rockets being chosen as San Diego was a city in motion and was heavily involved with missile and rocket development at the time. With official status, an enthusiastic fan base, and name secured, the San Diego Rockets were ready to join the NBA along with the Seattle Supersonics for the 1967-68 NBA season. It's important to note that this wasn't today's NBA, as it was pre-NBA-ABA merger, and the league was quite different and didn't have the same popularity it would later receive. NBA owners' high opinion of Breitbard and presumption of enthusiastic fans would both foul out. The Rockets' second season ended with a playoff berth, but the team would lose in the first round. They would have great success in the NBA draft, picking up players like future Rockets and Lakers head coach Rudy Tomjanovich, but with each coming year, the team and fan attendance got worse and worse. After back-to-back losing seasons and dismal fan interest, Breitbard decided to get out of the basketball business and subsequently sold off his team to Wayne Duddleton and Billy Goldberg of Texas Sports Investments for $5.6 million. And the two immediately moved the team to their hometown, Houston, Texas. Upon the team's arrival, many residents were shocked, as just like in San Diego, basketball had never done well in Houston up to that point. There also was nowhere for the team to play. The city offered the 9,200-seat Sam Houston Coliseum, but Duddleton and Goldberg quickly dismissed it, even as a temporary venue, and instead begun using the Holfheinz Pavilion and Astrodome, among other venues across the state, for temporary play. The purchase was rather quick and became a logistical problem, which resulted in the team also having to play games in San Diego as if they were still located there. Duddleton and Goldberg insisted, however, that a condition for moving was the construction of a new arena. The request seemed a little out of place given the lack of widespread popularity and proven business model of professional sports teams, let alone the lack of support for the sport of basketball itself among locals. But nonetheless, the city agreed to do the yet tested and unproven. After all, They had already done it with the Astrodome. One of the co-owners of Texas Sports Investments, Kenneth Snitzer, was a prominent Houston developer and led projects such as the 71-story Wells Fargo Bank Plaza, the 50-story Enron building, and Citicorp Center. He was the primary negotiator between the city and TSI for the public-private partnership that was to be the new home for the Rockets basketball team. The city originally wanted the building downtown, but for years, Snitzer had steadily been acquiring land for a massive development in Greenway Plaza, to which he had bought over 300 individual homes and granted the homeowners 5 years of rent-free occupancy, awaiting groundbreaking for his massive project. Bringing the Rockets to Houston, and specifically to Greenway Plaza, was simply a no-brainer to Snitzer as a massive boost to his development. And he successfully persuaded the city to move the proposed arena outside of downtown and right into his Greenway Plaza. Ground was broken for the Rockets' new arena in December 1973, and construction would continue for almost 2 years. Key personnel on the project included Kenneth Benson Architects, Lloyd Jones Architects, and Walter P. Moore and Associates as the structural engineers. The new, entirely city-owned basketball arena, named the Summit, opened on November 1, 1975, with a capacity of approximately 16,000 fans and a final construction cost of $18 million. The first event at the new venue was Heart to Heart, a special event to raise funds for the Baylor College of Medicine, the Methodist Hospital, and the Texas Heart Institute. The headliner for the event was entertainer Andy Williams, and the Rockets would play their first game at the Summit the very next day, defeating the Milwaukee Bucks 104-80, with Rudy Tomjanovich leading all scorers. 2 weeks later, The Who would host the venue's first concert on their By the Numbers tour. The arena marked a transition from small, pre-professional sports arenas to the large, lavish, amenity-filled venues that legitimized the NBA. The Rockets would finish a meager 40-42 at the end of the 1975-76 season and miss the playoffs. In the following year, the NBA and ABA announced a long-anticipated merger to combine the competing leagues. The merger made significant changes to not only the league structure, but to the game itself, introducing the three-point line and faster basket-to-basket style of play. The rest of the decade would see a significant rise in popularity for the Rockets as they routinely made the new NBA playoffs. Many of the major artists of the time would also play a show at the Summit, including Kiss, Queen, Bruce Springsteen, Aerosmith, and Billy Joel. The Houston Aeros and Houston Summit would also join the Rockets as tenants. While the Rockets' success continued to fluctuate, in 1979 they were sold to George Maloof, a businessman from Albuquerque, New Mexico, for $9 million. 1 year later, Maloof died, and his sisters sued to force liquidation of his assets. In the meantime, his 24-year-old son Gavin took over the organization for the next 3 seasons, including the Rockets' 1981 finals run, to which the team would lose to the Larry Bird-led Boston Celtics 4-2. Eventually, Houston Astros owner Charlie Thomas purchased the franchise for $11 million in 1982, which was the same year the chairman of the boards, Moses Malone, won league MVP. The rest of the 1980s would bring even more incredible concerts, including Journey, Cyndi Lauper, Prince, Genesis, and Michael Jackson on his Bad World Tour, most concerts of which released videotapes of their performances or had them featured on MTV. The Rockets would draft local legend Hakeem Olajuwon from the University of Houston first overall in 1984, and the team would bring championship games back to the Summit for the 1986 NBA Finals, to which the Rockets would only lose 1 playoff game at home, but once again fell to the Larry Bird-led Boston Celtics 4-2. With the team having several of the league's top players throughout its first decade or so in Houston, and despite losing the finals for the second time, the Rockets were looked on as a disappointment, with underachievement and failure due to players being hurt or suspended, to which the team was expected to have been a dynasty, but subsequently fell apart in the years after the finals loss, and continued to lack an NBA Finals trophy. The 1990s would end up being the last significant decade of concerts at the arena, as other private venues were built to capture the success the Summit had. Nonetheless, memorable concerts for the decade include Janet Jackson, Madonna, and Whitney Houston. This time around, the Rockets' organization was serious about winning. So much so that when their record was only 26-26 in the 1991-92 season, they fired their head coach and replaced him with now former Houston Rockets standout, Rudy Tomjanovich. They would go on to win the Midwest Division title and win their first playoff series in 6 years over the Los Angeles Clippers, before losing to the Supersonics in the Western Conference semifinals in an overtime Game 7 loss. Hakeem Olajuwon then held a players-only meeting and said, quote, "We go from here." With newfound momentum heading into the 1993 season, the Rockets were sold off once again, this time to Leslie Alexander, a bond trader from New Jersey, for $85 million. But Alexander would go on to own the team for more than 2 decades. The Rockets started the 1993-94 season red hot, opening with a 15-0 record, and finished the season 58-24, second in the West and a franchise record. Hakeem Olajuwon was named NBA MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. The Rockets would face a tough matchup with the defending Western Conference champions Phoenix Suns in the Western Conference semifinals, but won in 7 games and easily moved past the Utah Jazz to make their first finals appearance in 8 years. The 1994 NBA Finals featured Hakeem Olajuwon in his second championship appearance against college rival Patrick Ewing of the New York Knicks, who was playing in the finals for the first time. Ewing had gotten the best of the two when he and the Georgetown Hoyas defeated Olajuwon and the Houston Cougars 84-75 in the 1984 NCAA championship game. The Rockets had won both regular season matchups between them and were awarded home court advantage. Each game would prove to be low-scoring defensive chest thumps, as Patrick Ewing would set the NBA record for blocks in the series with 30 total, yet Olajuwon would outscore him in every game. They would alternate victories until Game 5, when the Knicks won back-to-back games in the much larger, sold-out Madison Square Garden. In Game 6 at the Summit, Olajuwon blocked the game-winning shot, securing a Game 7, to which the Rockets won with the largest margin of the game in a 90-84 victory. And the Rockets were now NBA champions. The Rockets had finally redeemed themselves from their earlier finals losses and finally hung a championship banner in the Summit, and Olajuwon capped off an incredible season by winning Finals MVP. The momentous Finals win would carry them into the 1994-95 season, finishing 47-35, this time 6th in the West. They would have a slightly more difficult time moving through the Western Conference playoffs as they never had home court advantage, but easily defeated Shaq and the Orlando Magic 4-0 in the 1995 NBA Finals and hung a second championship banner in the Summit, as a 6th seed nonetheless. By this point, the Summit had hosted 4 championship series, more than many of the other arenas of its era. It wasn't done yet, though, as the Houston Comets of the WNBA would win championships there 4 years in a row, from 1997 through 2000. In addition to the Comets, other tenants of the Summit included the Houston Aeros, the Houston Hotshots, and the Houston Thunder Bears and Texas Terror. Wrestling would also be another prominent event at the arena, hosting countless wrestling and boxing matches throughout its life, including a live episode of SmackDown, which was the first major entertainment contest following the events of 2001. In 1988, the Detroit Pistons opened the first ever privately owned and operated sports complex in Auburn Hills, Michigan. The venue proved to be revolutionary given its large number of luxury suites and their proximity to the floor, in addition to other amenities and features of its design. Nearly every artist imaginable would play the new groundbreaking arena within its first year, and the site garnered much attention within the league during the Pistons' back-to-back championship runs for its profitability and game experience. It wouldn't be long that cities started to replace their pre-modern NBA arenas with venues that rivaled the Palace, and throughout the 1990s, a building boom began that swept the majority of the NBA. Leslie Alexander was not immune to the movement, and after winning back-to-back championships for the city of Houston and 2 decades of play in an arena not up to modern NBA standards, he decided that now was the time to build a more profitable, state-of-the-art facility to house his winning basketball team. Alexander started by proposing legislation to dedicate state funds for a new arena, but was immediately squashed. A panel was then appointed by Houston Mayor Bob Lanier to study the project and quickly determined that it was essential that the Rockets stay in Houston. The Houston Aeros of the International Hockey League were also tenants in the summit, and Alexander needed Aeros owner Chuck Watson to be on board for the new arena, since Watson also owned the arena operating company, who managed the summit and owned the Rockets' lease. Alexander then offered Watson $30 million to buy out the rest of the Rockets' contract with the summit, but Watson quickly dismissed it. Alexander then sued, saying the team should be allowed to buy out their lease, but the city fired back, saying that if the Rockets broke their current lease, they couldn't be trusted in a new arena, and the franchise was forced to stay at the summit through 2003. In the meantime, legislation finally made its way through the Texas state legislature to authorize tax increases for a new arena pending referendum, and the bill was signed into law in July 1996 by then Texas Governor George W. Bush. After months of negotiations, the city, Aeros, and Rockets came to a deal that had the Rockets paying half of the construction costs for a new arena, but Watson felt the new venue was not going to benefit his business interest and started a public campaign against it, and the referendum was defeated that November, with 54% of voters voting against it. After the loss, NBA Commissioner David Stern stepped in and said if there wasn't a new arena built soon, the Rockets would need to be relocated. And Alexander then began entering negotiations with various cities across the country about relocation of his ball club, with Louisville, Kentucky being the frontrunner. This forced the Houston Sports Authority and now Mayor Lee Brown to get their act together and basically cave to the Rockets' demands. The city then found a way to fund a new arena without increasing taxes and got private industry on board through public support and donations. And in November 2000, voters approved the new proposal with 66% in favor. The new arena would require $30 million in land to be purchased by the city, and then they would also contribute $182 million for the new arena, with the Rockets contributing $35 million, and the rest was private donations. Ground was broken in July 2001, and construction continued for more than 2 years. $12 million alone was spent excavating the new site, with 32,000 cubic yards of dirt being removed to sink the arena. Citing the Rockets' upcoming departure, Watson sought out other methods of raising cash for the soon lifeless arena. And in 1998, the Summit became the first Houston sports venue to sell naming rights when the Compaq Computer Corporation signed a 5-year deal worth $45 million to rename the complex to the Compaq Center. The corporation, however, was only willing to own naming rights through the end of the Rockets' lease. The Houston Rockets would play their first game in the new Toyota Center on October 30th, 2003. The Compaq Center was now destined to be abandoned and lifeless in Greenway Plaza as Alexander and Watson took their teams downtown. Alexander then decided to form a new company, Clutch City Sports, to manage the new venue, meaning that once the Compaq Center closed, all personnel working there would lose their jobs. Unsure of what to do with the building, and desperate for cash due to budget shortfalls, the city put the building up for sale, hoping the impossible would happen. And sure enough, the impossible did happen. The year was 1959, and a high school dropout by the name of Joel Osteen was giving a Mother's Day sermon inside an abandoned feed store in Northeast Houston that had been donated for his new venture. John grew up as a Southern Baptist, but after several profound religious personal experiences, believed there was a more compelling and engaging way to spread the word of God, and along with his second wife, Dolores, he decided to found Lakewood Baptist Church for charismatic Baptists. The approach Osteen was embracing would later be considered the non-denominational, contemporary style, and the church soon dropped Baptist from its name, embracing the new worship technique. Just 4 years later, the couple would welcome a son they named Joel Osteen, who wound up one of 6 children total. Joel would go to school in Humble, Texas before attending Oral Roberts University, starting in 1981. He studied radio and television communications there, but never finished and did not graduate, opting instead to return to Lakewood Church and produce his father's television program, which he would do for the next 17 years. In 1979, the church had amassed a congregation of 5,000, and Osteen began broadcasting his sermon worldwide in over 100 countries. And the following decade would see John Osteen go from local pastor to global televangelist. The church would construct a new building in 1987 that could hold a congregation of 8,000, but it proved to only be a temporary fix, as it wasn't long before churchgoers found themselves rubbing elbows once again. By his death in 1999, John Osteen had grown the church to more than 15,000 and showed no signs of slowing down. After his father's death, despite having never given a sermon before, having no formal training, yet being a part of the church his whole life, the preacher's son, Joel Osteen, began preaching sermons, and 6 months later, the decision was made to name him the new head pastor at Lakewood Church, and his wife Victoria would be named assistant pastor. Joel was 36 years old, 1 year younger than his dad was when he founded the church. He was so nervous for his first sermons that he would wear his dad's shoes during the services. One of the first things that Joel Osteen was going to have to do after taking over the largest church in the nation was to solve the ongoing problem of being over capacity. It was already known that new facilities were going to be required, and the church first studied modifying their current building, which was only 13 years old. Despite desires to remain in the same location, it was quickly determined that redeveloping the current site wasn't going to be possible, and that the church was going to need more than 100 acres to accommodate all the parking needed for their growing congregation. Several tracts of land would come and go, but never seemed to work out or be the right fit. After years of searching, the Compaq Center and Greenway Plaza suddenly went on the market. It quickly became the best option available for the church, and soon after, Joel Osteen and his wife toured the facility. The city was hoping to sell the building outright, but instead, Lakewood offered to lease the building for 30 years in a $12 million deal and would pay $11.8 million up front, the lease coming in right at the appraised value of the building according to the city, who accepted Lakewood's offer. However, the Compaq Center had been originally constructed as part of a multi-acre development, and while the city owned the arena, the rest of Greenway Plaza was owned by Crescent Real Estate Equities Company, a publicly traded business based in Fort Worth, and they wanted to build a new, elaborate office building to add to their portfolio, and they weren't going to back down. Crescent then sued the city, claiming that having a church take over the arena would violate deed restrictions in Greenway Plaza, and the lawsuit would continue for more than a year and a half. The suit concluded with Lakewood maintaining its lease, but new restrictions will be put in place, such as parking for the complex will be limited to evenings and weekends, as well as the church would have to comply with many pre-existing cooperative agreements. The deal turned out to benefit Crescent, as several new restaurants and other businesses would move to Greenway Plaza, citing the presence of Lakewood Church. The final event at the Compaq Center, in its original form, was a ZZ Top concert on November 22, 2003, and construction on the colossal redevelopment of the 28-year-old Compaq Center began soon afterward. The original budget for the project was $75 million, but topped out at $95 million when it was all said and done. A team from Morris Architects, Shaw Architects, CHPA Architects, and Red Architects, among a pack of 32 other various consulting firms, were assembled to complete the once-in-a-lifetime construction project. In addition to renovation of the arena, the church would also construct a new 5-story tower on the east side of the building to serve as classroom and office space. A new utility plant would also have to be constructed, as central air and other utilities were originally part of a much larger system connected to Greenway Plaza. The locker rooms were converted into nursery space with a capacity of up to 1,000 children. The main floor of the basketball court was sloped up an entire story from the new main stage, which featured an 11-foot globe and seating for a 50-member choir and 18-member orchestra, among waterfalls on either side. Enough carpet was installed to cover 9 football fields, and a 10,000-square-foot bookstore was also added. The biggest challenge proved to be converting a space designed to be as loud as possible to a space intended to be as quiet as possible. Special dampeners were added to the ceiling, in addition to carpet on the floors and walls and all-cloth seating. 9 video camera platforms were also added to enhance broadcast capabilities, and all of the pre-existing satellite and video transmission facilities were removed and replaced entirely with up-to-date technology. Outside, a new sign would be added, in addition to pillars that would significantly change the building's facade. After 18 months of construction, and 4 years since originally signing the lease, the dream of transforming a championship arena into the largest house of worship in America was complete, and the Compaq Center was completely unrecognizable. Pastor Joel Osteen gave the first sermon in the new home of Lakewood Church on July 17, 2005, and could hardly contain emotions at the monumental achievement and powerful moment in the legacy of his family. Osteen also shared in the first sermon that he had brought his wife to the Compaq Center for their first date 19 years prior. The renovation netted 800 additional seats for a final capacity of 16,800 people, and the new facility enabled more than 30,000 to attend services weekly. Lakewood subsequently sold off their original campus and received $15 million from the sale. From that time on, the modern Lakewood Church was born. Minor updates to the sound system and similar infrastructure were made as technology improved, but overall, the renovation proved to be sound. There was talk of additional development directly west of the new church later on, but that land seems to have been developed into apartments and light retail. In March 2010, 7 years into the 30-year lease, Lakewood announced during a church service that they had purchased the building outright from the city of Houston for only $7.5 million. While this may seem like a joke price, the city council acknowledged how much money Lakewood Church put into the building and felt it was unfair for anyone other than Lakewood to benefit from that. While the congregation grew to over 45,000 attendees weekly more than a decade in, the church and their building are still going strong. Countless celebrities and public figures have attended services at the renovated arena, and Lakewood seems happy with their facility and the future of their organization. In 2017 and the events of Hurricane Harvey, the church received criticism for not opening its doors as a shelter for victims of the storms and first responders. Initial responses from Lakewood stated the building was inaccessible due to flooding, but Joel Osteen later stated in a televised interview, quote, "The church has been open from the beginning. We've always been open. How this notion got started that we're not a shelter and we're not taking people in is a false narrative." The church later donated over $1 million in materials and supplies directly to victims and recruited 2,500 members of its congregation to help rebuild parts of Houston damaged by the hurricane, helping nearly 1,200 different homeowners total. In 2021, a plumber by the name of Jason Cawley, doing routine maintenance, found hundreds of thousands of dollars hidden in the church's walls. Cawley later told his story to local and national media that one of the bathrooms had a loose toilet hanging from the wall, and after removing a tile, more than 500 envelopes containing cash and checks came falling out. He immediately reported to his supervisor and law enforcement. The money was believed to be linked to a church robbery of $600,000 in 2014, and the man was awarded $20,000 for his find and integrity. In the end, the Osteens would not confirm how much money was actually found in the toilet wall. I think it's one thing for a modern arena that's become outdated to be saved and repurposed, but for a building that old and of its architectural age, it's simply astonishing to see this building blend into everyday society like it belongs there. I mean, the groundbreaking venue that was the Palace opened 13 years after the Summit did, yet was torn down at 32 years of age. Contrast that to the Compaq Center, which as of 2022 sits at 47 years of age. Obviously, Lakewood Church is a one-time only circumstance, but with the rise of megachurches across the U.S., you may never know. The Compaq Center may only be the beginning of a larger trend. Countless arenas across the country sit idle or underutilized. Cities are baffled as to what to do with these massive, expensive, single-use facilities. Lots get torn down, some are left abandoned, and even fewer actually get repurposed. The Rockets have a lot of history with the building as well, but now that the church is there, I mean, you can still see the arena shape inside, but otherwise, the building really does look like it was built as a church. And I think while some fans can still feel the memories, the younger generations will always look at the Compaq Center as the home of that religious guy from TV. I think the question now is, how long is it before Lakewood Church outgrows the Compaq Center? Once they're ready, I know exactly where they can go. And on that note, thank you for watching. Subscribe to LaBrise TV for more Modern Ruins content. And be sure to comment what modern ruin you'd like us to cover next.